So I guess at this point, I'd like to move on to agenda item 3, which is really today's feature. And there was a lot of conversation at our January meeting about interest in what's happening in the town of Chesterfield. A lot of leadership moving forward, and at that time, we had to kind of hold our breath because we were waiting for town meeting and how that proposal might be embraced or not. And so to give us a full update on what happened at town meeting, plus a lot of other information, what happened prior to and maybe since, and where we are. So Brad Roscoe, who has been no stranger to attending these meetings, has agreed to tell us that story, and whether it's fair or not, we're calling it the Chesterfield model. We're hearing from communities in the Monadnock region and outside the Monadnock region about what is that and is it replicable in other communities. We don't know the answer to that, but we're glad to have your willingness to share with us, and so I'll invite you up.
So I have to stand over here since I'm talking to the microphone. So, first off, please interrupt with questions as I go along. Don't say in the end. I'd like to have a dialogue, so go for there. And the other major thing I have to mention to you is the model Chesterfield's put together works with all the state regs and everything for Chesterfield. I can't guarantee it's going to work for every town because it depends on a lot of conditions, and we'll go over some of those conditions here. So let's move on. So start off with, this is Chesterfield's second attempt to do something for broadband. In 2016-17, we looked at what we could do. We actually commissioned a study to look at wireless options for the town. We talked to all the providers. We came up with a coverage map so we knew what we had. And we then issued an RFP asking all the providers to say, hey, even not only our current providers, but anybody else who wanted to come and bid on it, to say what could they do for us. Yes?
Sorry, the coverage map, did you do that? Or
Yes.
did you have somebody independently do that?
I did that.
You did that.
Yeah, I'll get into the details of that later. So basically, the providers all came to us with their proposals, and every one of them said there was no business model for them to do this unless the town funded 100% of the project. And they shared with me their business models and confidentiality, and when I looked at the numbers and their arguments, I had to agree with them. There's just no way. And so we passed at that point because there's no way the town at that point was ready to fund that project. So what happened then in last summer, 2018, the Senate Bill 170, which allows the town to bond. So now we had a way to get money. Before, the only way to get this done was to get money out of the general spending budget of the town, and that just wouldn't work. So now the town could bond. And so we started following the process of bonding for SB 170, and I guess the law was signed in midsummer, and we started on it immediately since we'd already been working on it before. So first off, let me talk about broadband champion or team. This is important, how you coordinate, how you do this. It's no small effort. I figure between last summer and town meeting, I spent about 300 hours on this. So it's not a small effort. There's a lot of work. So some of that would be for now we've figured out our way through the rules and the laws would be shorter, but it does take a lot of time. Next, this is a lesson I learned from the first project we had in 2016. Know who's on your team. We formed a committee in 2016, and I had some members join which were very knowledgeable in the subject. Unfortunately, their politics were more important than their need for broadband, and they modified their technical recommendations based on their political stance. And so that basically everything I was doing, they were fighting the entire way to do anything. So make sure you know who's on your team, what their real motivations are. Now there's type of team. This is important. There's two ways you can do this. You can have a committee or a team appointed by the Board of Selectmen, or you can have a volunteer group. The problem is if you're appointed by the Board of Selectmen, that committee now has to hold notices of meetings, right to know meetings. They cannot meet and discuss anything unless they post a meeting. And actually in our town, most people refuse to even sign up and do anything on those type of committees. The way we've done this is volunteers. Gone in and say, hey, I'll do this. If you're willing to listen to me and talk to me, I'll do all this legwork for you. Just don't appoint me. And it's like, we're happy with that. And now you're not constrained by all those requirements. So that's an important difference. The caveat is, you're not appointed by the Board of Selectmen. You have to keep contact with them to make sure you're still seeing eye to eye with them. You're not going down in the wrong direction. And me being a previous selectman, I already had a foot in there, so it helped out well. So think about that. You gotta be careful, because if you're appointed by the Board of Selectmen, you gotta follow a different set of rules. Now let's talk about the SB 170 process. There's several steps in it. The first step is you have to put a request out for information. This is to ask all the providers in your town what's the coverages of the area. And by the SB 170, they have 2 months to respond. If they don't respond, you can assume whatever you want to, I guess. We were lucky everybody responded to that, but it's a first step. You have to go through this process, putting an RFI out. After you have the RFI out, you know what areas are underserved, because you now have all the information. You put a request for proposal out. You get your bids, you choose the best bid, which may not be the cheapest. The different criteria. And I'll go through these steps in more detail how we've done in Chesterfield. And finally, the starting the bond process, which is a whole other set of issues and concerns which I wasn't aware of ahead of time. How to write warrant articles, the hearings you have to have, the voting, those type of issues. And there are some little gotchas in there that got us too. So, request for information.
All right.
Yes.
Didn't you have a procedural defect? Have you gone back to your second town meeting?
Yes, we had a procedural defect. I'll go into it later. Our corrective meeting is to be May 11th. It's just like holding a whole other meeting. It takes a long time to put together.
We have to do that this Thursday. That's probably why I asked the question.
Yeah. So for us, basically how we count, we had to make a public notice on a meeting of 7 days ahead of time. We counted 7 days differently than the state counted 7 days, so we have to have a special meeting to rectify that.
Could you go back one slide for a second? You did attempt to get a town coverage map. Is that something you did, or is it something the vendors?
Something I did. Each individual vendor gave us the request for information was asking them what is their coverage. And each of them gave us feedback. And I'll show you more details on that in a second.
Brad, are these slides available to us online?
They can be.
Yes, yeah, they are. And
Okay.
so the colored sheet will take you to the page where you can flip through them afterwards.
And there's some other handouts too. For example, this RFI, which you can't read here. There's sample RFIs on the handout table over there too.
Brad, I'm going to just interrupt for a second. I'm sorry. Brad did invite questions as we go, which is great. But because we're trying to photo document and get this for folks who aren't able to be with us, I would just ask if people would ask your questions louder so that they're being picked up. Thank you.
Okay. So, request for information went out. We had a letter. We sent it to all our providers. Our providers are Argent, Comcast, Consolidated, and Y Valley in our town. Believe it or not, we actually had 4 providers in our town. So again, and in fact, I was a volunteer. I drafted the letter. The letter had to come from the Board of Selectmen. So I did all the writing, and they sent it out. So again, just working with the Board of Selectmen on that. Being Board of Selectmen have a lot of work, just taking the time to draft the letter for them. That just makes things happen. So the town sent it out under their letterhead and under their signature. We got information back. Surprisingly, all the providers actually responded. I was not expecting that. 2 of the providers basically gave me maps with highlights of what streets they went down. And the other one gave me a list of every address and what data rate they could offer at every address. And the other one basically only served two places in town, so that didn't have much impact. So I took all that data and I collected it together and put it on the coverage map, which is right here. So this took me a long time. There's probably better ways of doing this. I tried doing it house by house. You could just put lines down streets saying what the coverage is. But here, it's all color-coded by speed. The greener it is, it's 25 megabits and up, and the less green it is, it's slower and slower speeds. Now this was done on Google Maps, but one of the problems with Google Maps is, if you're a small town, a house location on Google Maps may be a mile from where the house actually is, or maybe an adjacent town. So I did quite a bit of work up front trying to get all that mapped out correctly. What I did was labor intensive. I think there may be quicker ways, just highlighting roads. That's probably all you need. But I will say the map was very useful in talking not only to providers, but especially to the taxpayers and the residents. And they could start seeing a map. Whenever I had a meeting, I carried a map along with me, and everybody was asking questions on the map because everybody wanted to know how it affected them. So the map is not only required for the Senate Bill 170 process, but it's also a very good talking point and very useful thing to have. So once we had the information in and we had a coverage map, we knew what areas were now underserved. At least they told us we're underserved. And one thing I should point out, the vendors and the coverages, they don't always know what their coverage really is, okay? Sometimes you'll conflicting information. I mean, we had a sample data where there was a sea of people getting 1.6 or 3 megabits per second, and right in the middle was a guy getting 50 megabits per second from the same company. And we know in the wire there's no way to happen, okay? So when you get this is the best information they can put together. It's not necessarily accurate on their end either, okay? They don't actually know what their coverage is that well. Yes?
Did you challenge any of that with the providers?
Yes, I challenged it with one of the providers, and they went back and reanalyzed and did a restudy from their database, and they did move some things around and corrected some. Yes?
Unserved, underserved, for the purposes of SB 170 is 10-1.
25.3. It's the state statute now says it's the FCC standard, the federal regulations, which is 25 down, 3 up. So that's now, you cannot call it broadband unless it's 25.3. It's internet otherwise. Yes?
Did the mistakes from the companies tend to underreport or overreport the coverage, or just neither one particularly?
Not that I can tell. It turned out not being that important. It just looked like it had some questionable data points, essentially. When you know their technology and you see some outliers in there, you know something's messed up. You don't know what, though. And so if you notice back in my map, I put best estimate, because that's our best guess.
Brad?
Yeah.
Jim Norman. How did you determine who the providers were, and did any of them have any kind of proprietary franchise rights to any of this? Sure.
Okay, so, well, basically from my earlier study, I made contact, I knew who the providers were. For one of the companies, they wanted us to sign a confidentiality agreement before they gave us the data, which we did. We had to iterate on that because we couldn't have used the data the way we wanted to use it if we went with their original draft of their drawing, of their contract. So we got that information, we did the sharing, and the data was all collected and combined in such a way that you couldn't tell which data comes from which provider, unless you're very knowledgeable about it. You had another part of the question?
Was there like a phone franchise that got in the way of any of this?
Okay, no, we do have franchises in town for cable, but they're not exclusive. So there's no exclusive franchises in town. They're all non-exclusive. Okay, we put out an RFP. So the things that are concerned with RFP is what your business model is. And so this is where you have to really think what you want. Town of Chesterfield, we did not want to own the internet network. We did not want to own it, we did not want to operate it. We have enough trouble providing services we do. As I like to say, we have electricity, we don't provide water, we don't provide sewer. We've got a volunteer fire department, but everybody wants broadband, okay? So we don't want to run it, we wanted somebody else to own it and take care of it and manipulate it for us. That was the biggest part of the business model consideration. We did not want to own it in the long term. So you have to put down what your business considerations are, what's important to you. One of the things we put in here, because of the bonding process, we put in that the town had to own the asset. And as it came out, that all of the bidders had a problem with that, town owning asset, and that was one thing we had to get by. So once the RFP was out, we made a waiver on the fact that the town had to own the asset for everybody to put their bids in, and we negotiated afterwards about ownership of the asset. So that was one of those sticking points we had to figure our way through. Timeline, you need to have the timeline that you need to have information back, and then what types of terms. So we put in terms that we don't have to take the lowest bid, we don't have to accept any bids. So we left it totally open to where we could do what we wanted to. And again, the request for proposal, I wrote it, I gave it to the selectmen, and it was issued by the town, not by me. Again, do a little legwork, town issues the official documents. I wanted being the direct contact all the time though. So I mentioned the RFP issues about the who owns the asset, and said all the bidders had a problem with that, so we took the, as I said, we set the proposals without that requirement at that time. So the RFP went out on November 28th. Bids were due by December 28th. 3 providers responded: Consolidated, Urgent, and Wye Valley. And from them we had 5 different proposals. Yes?
Brad, are you gonna go back to the owning the assets piece?
Yes, we'll discuss that more.
Okay.
That's one of the key points. Yes?
Brian, did you go out to more providers than was in the town at that point, or only to those?
We actually, I sent out the RFP to everybody that might be interested, not just the providers in town. Of course, the providers in town already had a leg up because they had infrastructure, but there was other providers that we dealt with 2 years earlier that made bids then, which we also included. And anybody that I found that might be a possibility, I sent them a copy of it too. So put it out as much as we could, because we had no idea what was coming back. And to be totally honest with you, when the proposals came back, the scenario we settled on is not the one I thought we'd be settling on when I started looking at things. So we got the 5 different proposals from 3 providers. So you get a proposal in, and everything's a little bit different in the proposals. Everybody's highlights certain things that can't do this, that. So I sat down and had a meeting with every provider and asked them some questions to make sure we went through the list so I could put everything on an apples and apples comparison, answer questions that I was confused about in their bid, because there's always issues there. And also got a chance to have a nice dialogue with it. And I should point out that the first thing, at least with Consolidated and Argent, the questions were, is can you explain why your service is so bad right now? Because everybody's service is really bad right now. Reliability just stinks. And so that's one of the big concerns, not only speed by our townspeople, but the reliability is terrible. And so that was one of the questions, because why would we give money to a company that doesn't have unreliable service? Okay, I don't expect you to be able to look and see any of this, but I tried to put everything into some sort of summary, comparing apples to apples the best we could. And you see 5 columns there. They're with the different proposals, 2 from 2 companies and 1 from another company. The proposals are ranged anywhere from about $500,000 to $2.1 million. And so we looked at these proposals. So to give you a rundown of the proposals, one proposal was to upgrade DSL servers to handle all the underserved people. Okay, so that was just, so that gets everybody else in the town, the underserved, up on DSL. And that was $1.8 million for about 300 people, or 18% of the town. Another proposal was to scrap all the DSL and put fiber everywhere, which is the proposal we went to. That bid was for $2.1 million. We had a bid from a cable company, which was to handle the underserved by running fiber for the last mile. They would do cable to fiber converters and run fiber to the last people to get them on. And they had that option, plus they had another option of running fiber all the way to those people. So everybody in the middle would also get fiber. That proposal did not cover the entire town, where the other ones covered the entire town. And we had a proposal to look at putting wireless towers up, so we do wireless coverage. And the wireless coverage would hit everybody. It would get 25.3 to most everybody, but not guaranteed everybody. So we're talking about that was 25.3 coverage versus everybody else was talking 100 megabits up. So those were the options we looked at.
Brad, what happened to Comcast?
Made a bid.
How many homes do they serve now in Chesterfield?
I can't tell you the exact number, that's confidential, but it's a small number. Okay, so on January 16th, so this is where, at one point, so far I've been doing everything myself, but to look at the bids, I brought in some other people. So it just wasn't Brad looking at the bids, so there's other eyes. So I brought in two other people I knew in town who had extensive knowledge on broadband. I mean, one guy's an ex-IBMer who used to work on network solutions. And another guy was a local guy who works in town on InterServe. So basically, three of us looked at all the proposals and came to a consensus between the three of us, and then we made that recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. So we made that recommendation on January 16th. They agreed to accept our recommendation, and we presented it to town on January 19th. So we had a town meeting. It was just an information meeting. It was no official meeting, but we discussed what the proposal was. And the proposal was to provide fiber to every home in town, guaranteed high-speed capability. Not everybody would need it, but up to gigabyte. High reliability, since it's an all-new fiber network. It could be bundled with phone and video services also. And it'd be a bond of $1.8 million for 20 years. And the bond interest and principal was guaranteed to be paid by Consolidated. So there was actually no money out of the taxpayer's pocket. The town was doing the bond, and it cost the taxpayers nothing. Part of the deal was every subscriber would pay $10 a month infrastructure service fee on top of the monthly charges. That is how we would use to pay off interest and principal. So Consolidated would collect $10 per month per person, per subscriber, to broadband only, and use that to pay off the interest and principal. And if it wasn't enough, they guaranteed they would kick in enough to cover it.
Brad, is per subscriber the same as per address?
No, you have some places maybe rental property, maybe 3 or 4 apartments, so each one would be a separate subscriber. Yes.
Was there either insurance or collateral to protect the actual repayment by Consolidated?
Okay, no, so that gets into contract terms. We'll get into the contract here a little bit more, so we have some terms in the contract for that. Yes.
What do they estimate the subscriber rate to be?
Again, that's confidential, I can't tell you that. Yes.
Did the area of your town drive some of the costs, or the length of your roads? What kind of?
Yeah, so we have approximately 120 miles of roads. And so basically, that's what drives the cost of putting, because you're putting fiber down almost every road.
How many premises?
We think there is between 1,600 and 1,800. It's kind of hard to tell because we have rental properties in some of those, and it's amazing how hard it is to figure out exactly how many premises there really are. But we think somewhere between 1,600 and 1,800.
Now you know how the US Census feels.
Okay. And finally, last thing with the proposal, it's a non-exclusive proposal, so other people can still compete. So the existing people, Argent and Comcast and others can still compete in the area. It's non-exclusive. Now, one of the little items in SB 170 is there has to be a public benefit of this bonding which exceeds the total amount of the project money. Okay, so you have to document what the town's getting out of it in dollars and what the utility or the provider is getting out of it in dollars. And you have to have public meetings on this to discuss this several times with the town to show that there's a public benefit of this. And so how do you do this? Well, first off, this public benefit calculation has to be done. It has to be accepted by the governing body. Our town's a selectman. And then you have to have several public hearings to discuss it. This is a key part there. And the public benefit must exceed the benefit to the private sector. And you have to justify all this. Also, you can't read this either, but there's a handout on this, the calculation. So I was able to find a very recent study done by University of Colorado, which predicted the effect on home values with broadband coverage. And that study said, if you had this speed, this is how much less your house is worth because your broadband's not adequate. And so I use this for a calculation, which you can probably see better in this slide, to say, okay, the 255 houses we had with 0 to 20 megabits per second, their value would increase about 3.3%, and that was equivalent to $2.1 million. And same thing for the different coverage of houses. So from this, I was actually able to calculate a value of $4.8 million benefit to the town and increase real estate. This does not include anything like economic development or anything. But you have to have some calculation showing the public benefit exceeds the project. And it's not exceed, I inappropriately thought it needed to exceed the bond value of $1.8 million. But no, it needed to exceed the total value of the project, which was the bond value, the contribution from us, for the town, and the contribution from the provider. And that turned out to be $2.5 million from the provider, so $4.3 million was the total project, which was less than the $4.8 million benefit to the town. You had to have that calculation accepted by the governing body and the residents to move forward and bond. This totally neglected economic development type concerns, which are more hand-waving. This is a bit hand-waving, but at least it tries to put things on a real foot. And this has to be done in order to bond. It has to be done, has to be accepted by the Board of Selectmen or whoever your governing body is, and then it has to be presented to the taxpayers, the voters, a couple times at notified public hearings. So that's a very important piece there, and the copies of documents just reference the paper and show this calculation that I did. Okay. Contract negotiations. The biggest issue was who owned the asset so we could bond. And so we went around on this for a long time. There was no way we could find a way to bond if the town did not own the asset. So we found a good compromise. This was the thing that was the straw that could have broken everything. When we found a way around this, we used the consolidated funded facilities to be owned by Consolidated. Their $2.5 million contribution, and the town-funded network, the $1.8 million contribution, would be owned by the town. But Consolidated had an exclusive indefensible right to use, an IRU, to those facilities. Means that permission cannot be undone or removed. So town owns it, but they have the sole right and usage of those funds. That made all the state regulators happy, and the regulations could go through, and everybody could live with that. That was what made the whole deal work. So that's the way the town owns it, and the utilities were happy with it. The providers are happy with it. Now, I should point out, going into this, now we had no idea way through this, so when the bidders, the providers were bidding on the RFP, they all said they had to own the asset. Well, now going forward, if you put an RFP out, you can say, town will own the asset, but we'll have an IRU, and this arrangement can be done, so maybe more people will bid. Okay? But we weren't sure going in whether we can make this whole deal work because of that one point. That was about 6 weeks of sweating right there. Yes.
So, this may sound silly, but what is the asset, and do you have to maintain the asset?
No. In the contract we're writing, the asset is the fiber network throughout the town. That's what the town owns. What Consolidated owns is the drops from the pole to people's houses. And that actually costs more money to put in than the town infrastructure. So about $2.5 million for the final drops from the poles to the houses. And the $1.8 million is for the fiber throughout the rest of the town.
So the repeat, anything that has to be repeat signals or that you don't have to maintain?
No, that's all. We give them the indefensible right of use for the asset, and they're responsible for total maintenance and repair and everything. Again, the town does not want to have any responsibility for that network at all. And again, that's written in the contract, so we spent a lot. I was quite surprised. We actually had a contract draft written and agreed before town vote, which I never thought we'd be that far ahead. Yes.
After the 20 years, then the ownership actually defaults to Consolidated.
Yes, because the next line here, the Consolidated guarantees payment of bond interest and principal every year till the bond's paid off. So they're paying for the bond and the interest, and when the bond's paid off, it's theirs.
And they're paying it for the $10 per month surcharge.
Right. And again, the first couple of years it's going to run light, and so they're going to have to subsidize that. Later years, it'll cover it, because first it's going to take 2 years to build out, so the first 2 years they're not going to have full subscribers on there. And as every 2 years, it's maximum $10 per month. As the numbers show, it could be less than every 2 years. It's reevaluated and can be adjusted down lower.
And
Yes.
who pays the $10?
Every subscriber.
Every,
Subscriber to broadband only.
so if you just have a phone service.
Doesn't cost you. You don't pay for it. And if you just stay on the existing copper from Consolidated, you don't pay for it either. It's only when you convert to fiber. Now, there's a period of time that somewhere along the line, the copper will be obsoleted and everybody's going to have to convert. So those people have to pay at that point in time. But I'm pretty sure because of reliability issues, people are going to convert as soon as they can.
Brad, you mentioned what could have killed the deal. I think you referred to sleepless nights.
Mm-hmm.
That was accepted, that arrangement was ultimately accepted by state regulators, is that?
Yes, we had to get the, not only for the state regulators, our bond counsel, we had our own town attorney, we had the bond counsel attorney, and we had the Consolidated attorneys all making sure that they all agreed with the terms and that they were all legal.
So I would imagine every future arrangement might have its own flavor to it, but do you believe some precedent has been set through this particular arrangement because of those?
Well, actually, it turns out we were wondering what to do with this, and it turns out this is done all the time for other things like sewer systems and other types of things by towns. It just, we hadn't thought of, I didn't know about this, but some lawyer, or I think our contract lawyer said, how about this? They were familiar with it. Yes.
In this instance, not with respect to the attorneys, but the regulators, who specifically was the regulator who had to weigh in and approve this?
Okay, it's really our bond counsel. So our bond counsel is the person who goes through and makes sure all the T's are crossed, the I's dotted, and everything, and every step of the way on that.
So it didn't involve TRA or some
No.
other PUC or anything like that?
No. Basically, we had to get the bond lawyer convinced, and then she checked with other regulations. I think she even talked to some other lawyers, and but she was all happy with all the stipulations, because there was all sorts of stuff too. Like, for example, the $10 a month subscriber fee. In order for to pass a muster, that fee cannot be set by Consolidated. It has to be set by the Board of Selectmen. So every 2 years, the Consolidated makes a recommendation, gives numbers to the Board of Selectmen, and the Selectmen have to decide if they're going to change that subscriber fee or that infrastructure fee. So there's a lot of little things that went along with that. There was more than that. I can't think of them off the top of my head, though. There's a lot of little items that had to come together and work through that maze of all the regulations. But this is the thing that made the whole deal work.
Is early payoff on the bond an option?
No.
No, so it had to go for 20 years.
Yes. And you know, if you look at it, if there's anything short, I don't see the cash flow that's gonna make it any faster than 20 years. Hopefully, you know, year 10 or 11, that fee may be changed to $9 or $8, but I can't guarantee. It depends on what the subscriber rate is.
But no advantage to, say after 10 or 11 years, that the fee could be adjusted down, no advantage to keeping it at where it was at the $10, as opposed to the 8 or 9.
That's up to the board of selectmen to decide, negotiations consolidate. But there's no way, the municipal bonds, there's no way you can pay off early, the way they're aggregated. Okay. Other thing we talked about in the contract, we wanted net neutrality in there. We didn't want anything screwing up that, so they were happy to go net neutrality. That's where they operate currently. We were afraid things may change in the future, but we put that in there. Other things are also put in there. It was actually part of the bid. I forgot to mention, the RFP also included the monthly fees and the installation costs, because that was all part of the model. We wanted to see the whole picture. And so monthly fees and installation costs are also in the contract. And there's also in the contract that there's not going to be any data caps or throttling of data rates, total data downloads. That's currently consolidated as a position, but we've also wanted that in the contract because things change. Our contract won't change. They may change. Yes?
Were there any fees for, you know, an individual home being further away from the road than others?
Yeah, the installation, the first 150 feet are free, and after that it's 55 cents a foot for aerial installation. Underground installations are going to be dependent if there's existing conduit or whatever the conditions are there. But basically 150 feet free, 55 cents a foot after that. Again, that to us was an important part of the package because we didn't want to have this whole thing come out and the subscription fees or the installation costs being exorbitant. So that was part of the request of the RFP. We wanted to know that information. We looked at it. Actually, when we looked at those numbers from all of the people who bid on them, all those numbers were within $5 of each other per month. So there's a tight grouping there.
So
Yes.
can you tell us what that is?
Not off the top of my head.
100 meg, 50 meg, 100 meg?
I would be guessing too much on that. In fact, let me go back to this table and look. See if I can see it on here. Okay, 25 megabits is $55. I'm sorry, $70 for 30 megabits. And if you look at the other providers, they all ran the same rate. Now, normally when they put in a new service, the first couple of years, they'll give you a discounted rate for the first 2 years or something like that. But it's comparable rates all the way across from all the providers. And that's their published rates. You know, if I looked at my current published rate, the published rates don't match what you're usually paying. You usually work some sort of deal. Yes?
If the first 150 feet are free, does that matter whether the house already gets its electric underground or aerial, or will they match it?
It's 150 feet free for aerial only. If you have underground, more than likely it's hopefully a conduit.
Yep.
If it's not, then it's whatever the charge can be for, because it depends if you're on ledge or whatever the situation is for that.
But assume that you have conduit, is that 150 feet going to be that conduit as well, or is it just?
That'd be 150 feet of the conduit would be taken
Okay.
care of, and you pay for the rest of it. But I think this was the important part of the RFP, is we wanted all the information, not only the cost of installation and running network, we wanted the maintenance, we wanted the subscriber fees, and we wanted the installation costs for everybody in the town. We wanted to know everything. And we compared all those factors. And I was actually quite surprised that the subscription rates and installations were all pretty much the same across. Yes?
So, 25.3 was what we were trying to map out essentially in terms, and the 1.8 applies to anything under 25.3.
Right.
Correct?
Okay, so that's one detail I didn't mention. I think I know where you're going. Because the state regulation says you can only use the bond money to handle the underserved. Okay? So I mentioned we had two bids from Consolidated, one for $1.8 million to just to bring up all the underserved on copper and DSL, and the $2.1 million to put fiber everywhere. Well, they read the rules and they said, we really don't want to stick with that copper. We'll do the full fiber thing for $1.8 million, which is the same rate as which is in the copper. And the regulators were happy with that trade-off. So we're paying the $1.8 million, which was the cost of just the DSL to the underserved, but we're getting the whole town taken care of.
Did you have to go back and forth? I know you, in other words, you challenged some of the speeds that the providers had stated, and in order to clarify, what was under 25.3. So you had to clarify all that, and were you then in sync when you went to the bond council and the regulators, so that the regulators, got one story relative to what the underserved really was?
Yeah, the bond council, I provided the information, the coverage maps, every RFP, or every bid we received, and told them what we decided on and why we decided on it, and our justification. And once we came up with the your indefensible right of usage, they were all happy. I mean, it was negotiating with the provider, negotiating with the bond council, with the town lawyers, and with the provider's lawyers. So it was. So that's where a lot of my hours were spent, was just talking on phones and communicating emails and stuff.
So just one last piece then. Did you, in determining that under 25.3, with the providers, did you actually have to go to homeowners at times and say, can you tell us what you're actually getting? Did you have to go to that extent, house by house sometimes?
No, I did that actually in 2016-17 when I did my initial study. I had people do surveys, we got information, we did a lot of legwork there, and we worked with the providers to get the best estimate we had in 2016-17. And actually what I got back from them in 2018 was not too different than what I had in 2016-17. So I was fairly confident at that point.
Thanks.
Yes.
Was there, or rather, what is in the contract to protect Chesterfield if CCI goes bankrupt?
Okay, it's two things. So first off, the town owns the asset until the bond's paid off. So if they go bankrupt, we own the asset. If they go bankrupt, as a public utility, more than likely, the feds are going to help somebody come along and buy them out or take over their territory. So if that's the case, then whoever takes it over has to fulfill the conditions of our contract. Our contract terms last through a takeover like that. So there's two ways. One is, probably if that happened, somebody else would come in and take over the consolidated business through some higher maneuvering. And if not, we own the asset, and that'd be a very valuable asset, and we could sell it.
Thanks.
So that's the level of our protection. So it's not without risk, but it's pretty low probability. Yes?
Did you have to get consolidated to explain how they would eventually abandon the remaining copper system?
Okay, so that's in the contract too, is to try to remove the copper. One of the problems with removing the copper is that it takes federal and state regulator approval to do that, because there's many other things that may be in that copper other than just phone service or DSL, maybe life support, monitoring stuff, other things, alarm systems. So we put in the contract, they will remove stuff as fast as they can and as best they can get through cleared by the regulators. So they're going to try to remove all the copper between the poles and the houses as they install, if there's not some special thing there. But the major trunk lines and things like that, they have to get clearance from the Fed and state regulators before they can take it down.
And they'd have to eat the cost of providing fiber to any holdout, plain old telephone subscribers.
Yeah, they basically, if it's just a landline only, they will install that fiber to that person if they don't have broadband at the normal way. Because again, they have every incentive to get rid of that copper, because the copper is causing them no end of headaches and problems, because it's very old copper and it wasn't taken very good care of over the previous owners. fact, if it rains, you get crappy broadband. Yes.
What is the $9 maintenance plan at the bottom?
Oh, that,
It's not the $10, that's something different.
that's something different, yeah, that's to cover stuff in your house,
Oh.
routers and stuff like
Is it
that.
required,
No.
did they say?
Yes.
You may not be able to answer this, but do you have any sense about whether CCI would want to do another deal like this?
They are very anxious to do this. They believe this is the model they would like to push. They have a limit on how much funds they can borrow to do projects like this, and this gives them a way to get more funds to do projects. So they are very happy to do more deals like this. But I must remind you, SB 170 is you have to put bid out to everybody. You have to get bids out. So you may find that consolidated is not your best option.
Good problem to have.
Yes.
But Consolidated obviously took some chances with Chesterfield as a pilot, basically, putting up doing it for 1.8 as opposed to the 2.1 and so forth. Why do you think they were particularly interested in Chesterfield? Do you think it was because of the legwork that you had done, and maybe the interest that the town had shown? Was there an incentive, do you think, for Consolidated to think this is a good risk?
Okay, so I don't know for sure. I have a feeling since we're first, we're probably getting a better deal, better conditions than others might, because they want to show this off. They like this model and they want to replicate this model. So it's just a feeling I got talking with them and negotiating with them, because at one point, Consolidated was not going to get the bid, because $1.82 million. I was having trouble figuring out how to sell a $500,000 project to the town. How was I going to sell a $1.8 million project to town? And day he called me on the phone and said, well, how about if we did that $2.1 million for 1.8 and we'll pay interest and principal? I was hitting the roof. I couldn't believe that day. Because before that point, they were not even in the game. And that's what put them in the game, because now I could sell to the taxpayers that it was not going to cost them anything in taxes. And the people that are subscribing to it are paying for it, and that was an easy sell. If I had to do the other ones, nobody came up with any other deal like that. To bond $500,000 to help 18% of the town would have been a very hard sell. Yes,
What was the margin of victory at town meeting?
85%.
Great.
Yes.
We met with Consolidated 3 days after Brad announced, along with Consolidated, announced after the January meeting this deal. And naturally, we said to them, we like the Chesterfield plan. And the people that we were meeting with said, we're not sure that's economically feasible, that it's whether or not it's economically sustainable for the company. So as it works out, they said they would look at Westmoreland and they would come back with an engineering study for us. And having this meeting today, once again, works out perfectly. Your timing is perfect, by the way. And 3 days before we meet them the first time, the day before we meet them the second time. And so we'll meet with Consolidated tomorrow to see what their engineering study brings for our town. And we'll be able to share that.
A lot of it depends also on fitting that criteria, because, basically, I'm sure they're going to do the same thing. They're doing an engineering study, saying, okay, let's put DSL routers out there to do things, because they know that they can only bond up to handling the underserved. And look at the relative cost of doing fiber everything versus that. They've learned that. I've learned that. So I'm sure they're going to give you 2 quotes. One was the DSL because, but again, you can't really run with that because you have to go through the whole SB 170 process, putting out the bid.
We sort of are cart in front of the horse here a little bit. We had already met with White Valley. Arjun still has not responded to us since August. But Consolidated was immediately, we had the meetings scheduled before your meeting, your announcement at least. their first goal, I mean, their first, how about we do this, was let's bring everybody up to 10-1 in town. How would that work for you? And our comment was that doesn't work very well because we're already gonna have your attention this one time, and then you're gonna go somewhere else. There's gonna be years before you come back to see us again. So we're going, provided we don't have to sign something tomorrow night before they speak with us, we'll be happy to share that with, it's a public meeting.
Yeah, so there is another source of funds becoming available now, some more CAF funding. If you remember, there's federal grants on that about 10 years ago. And usually those funds do not go to the right spot. I'll give you Chesterfield's response to that. We had 2 sections of Chesterfield. The area that qualified for CAF funding from the federal government was actually the better served part of town, and the worst served part of town did not qualify for it. Because the way the FCC made the coverage maps was fraught with errors. If you had one house in an area, in a census block that had high coverage, they assumed the entire census block had that coverage. And so it's totally worthless information, essentially. And so in our really poorly served areas where we had Comcast for a couple houses. And so they assumed that whole census block had Comcast coverage, which they didn't. And the other section of town, which actually had really good coverage, they qualified for money and upgrades. So part of our problem with the federal stuff.
The USDA just came out with $600 million in funding for rural broadband initiative. Brian Fouché, who happens to own Y Valley here in Keene, is one of the providers that you were able to speak with, and is one that we've already spoken with as well. And we saw that 600 million, 200 million is in grants, 200 million is in loans, 200 million is a combination of the two. So we got all excited about this. We thought, great, this could be a way that we have dollars that we can now apply, we can go and try to get, grant funds for. So I reached out to Brian, and Brian had met with the USDA the day before. Brian's comment was, the only part of New Hampshire that will qualify for any of these USDA funds that are currently available is the area north of Berlin.
Let me skip ahead a couple of slides and talk about grants. I looked at those also. Looked at the USDA grants and the Northern Border grants. Because
Northern Border is separate from the USDA.
right, they're 2 different grants. I looked at both of them. For both of them, the town has to own the asset forever. I got Northern Border to say, maybe 20 years you can give it away, but we're not sure, we can't guarantee it. Nobody's going to sign a contract with that guarantee. So the USDA, there's the ownership issues, there's area coverage issues, and there's only the 10 megabit criteria that they're going for. So USDA was pretty worthless. Northern Borders, the ownership was an issue, but the grant has to be required. There's different levels of acknowledgement of whether you can get a grant. So if you already have the funds and you're asking for a grant, they're going to say, well, you already have the funds, waiting to grant for it. So you have to have a program which is already, it's contingent on getting that grant money. We'd already had approval before we started looking at the grant, so that washed out for us too. And also, for us, it also would delay the start of the project, because as soon as you talk with the federal government, they want to control everything. And so you couldn't start the project until they said you could start the project. And right now we have consolidated one to start before we even sign the contract. And if we went for this type of grant, they wouldn't be allowed to do that. They probably wouldn't be able to start until September or October, because of the controls that they want to put on their restraints. So I looked at grants, and combining any grants with SB 170, I don't see any way of doing that.
I think the new USDA grant is for 25-3. I think it's, quote, FCC broadband.
It is.
Okay.
But you can only get the grant in areas that don't have 10-1.
Right.
Right.
So the outcome has to be 25-3. But if the area already offers 10 meg, then that area doesn't count. So unlike the bonding, which says you can bond for anything that's less than 25.3. The USDA grant is only eligible for those areas less than 10.1, those areas that don't have 10.1. And so that changes the proportion of the number of houses and premises that you can bond, that you can borrow for or grant for under USDA.
And there's other rules of that too. For instance, all those homes have to be in a contiguous area. They can't be offshoots in different parts of the town. They have to be.
changed.
That's changed?
Yeah.
Okay.
It changed in the latest.
And you also had to supply a broadband-free zone in that area for anybody who wants to drive up and use it for a period of years. So there's lots of strings that made it very unfathomable when I looked at it. Now, hopefully the new regulations get better, but that's past our interest at this point. Yes?
There are two other caveats with the northern border, and that is you have to be either in a distressed or semi-distressed zone. Chester County in the semi-distressed zone, which requires a 50-50 match of funds, and you're capped at $500,000 maximum for any construction project.
The other requirement, at least that I understood in the recent conversation around the USDA, was that they really require a third-party engineering study. Did your process require that at the SB 170? Did it require an independent third-party engineering study?
No, it doesn't. It's a contract with the provider. They're doing their own engineering design. So there's no third party involved. That's not part of the SB 170 process. Because again, we're not getting any grant money or anything like that, so we don't have any strings.
And you didn't do any third-party engineering? I mean, not only was it not required, but you didn't do it, period.
Not this time. Prior, we did it on the wireless thing in 2016. We did a third-party study, but for this, no. Yes.
So is the bonding, if it's based on anything less than 25.3, is that advertised or actual? I assume actual based on the studies that were done.
It's advertised. Because 25.3 means the wording is always up to 25 megabits down, okay? And this is one of the things when I did my survey in 2016 of town people, I asked them, what is your promised download speed and what are you actually getting? I had them run tests. And I found for all the providers except one that they pretty much got what you promised, up close to it. One was about half what was promised.
I mean, my personal dealings with Consolidated, for instance, we have 25.3 at our house. And they tell me that they can guarantee 80% of promised through wired only, through hardwired only. And wireless, they can't guarantee anything.
Right, basically it's a bottleneck, so they can't serve everybody 25 at the same time, but people timeshare different highs and lows, so that's why they say up to 25.
Okay.
And or up to 50 or up to 100, whatever. Now, when they tell me with the fiber to the houses, and up to about 100 megabits per second, you'll get it up to about 100 megabits per second. It won't be much less than that. If you start going up to half a megabit per second, it's not half a gigabit per second, 500 megabits per second, they say, you may be getting 80% rather than the full 100%. Okay, let's go back here. Talk about contract negotiation, bonding process. The bond lawyer or bond counsel verifies that everything we do meets state regulations. So they're the ones that they verify everything, the contract ownership and payments, everything we talked about in those deal with how we own the asset and the indivisible right of use, the payments. They had to agree that it was to state statute. Okay. They also verified all the steps have been done. Said we had to have a couple meetings on the public benefit calculation, hearings and posting dates. Minutes of the meetings must contain specific information saying that you did this, so the bond lawyer has a way of proving that that was actually done. Now, we did run into a little problem. We had little procedural mistakes. We had two procedural mistakes. One was one of the public benefit meetings had a wording error in it. We coded the wrong RSA in the public notice. So had to throw that whole meeting out and hold it over again. Okay, that's a level of detail. One of the public benefit meetings was off by 1 day. We counted 7 days differently than the state counts 7 days. And so we were off by 1 day. So that was too late to have another one before the town meeting, so we're doing a curative meeting at this point. So we're having a special town meeting, which is just like holding a whole new town meeting, and we're just asking the town voters to vote and say, yeah, it's okay, it was only did 6 days rather than 7 days. Okay, but that is as much work as an entire town meeting, and it requires a 2/3 vote also. So we have that on May 11th. So those are little gotchas that you got to watch out for all those little details. And the wording in the guidelines is not obvious. Now, the 7 days we thought we had covered. There's also one word we just figured out, the word within 1 week meant something differently than what we thought it meant. They had a different definition of what within 1 week meant. So it actually meant a full week ahead of time rather than in the week before.
Did you have to get state permission to hold that curative meeting?
No. We just, we worked with our bond counsel. She gave us all the information and the dates and everything we had to do, and then we're just following the procedures.
Is the required vote 2/3 of all voters or 2/3 of those that attend?
2/3 of those that attend. And it's a written vote, but polls have to be open for an hour. And I don't think we should have any problem with that to be past the 85% margin at the first vote. In fact, I tell you that the town meeting, it was the first item on the ballot. We had over 200 people show up. Okay, normally we have 80 to 90 people. We had 200 people show up for that first article. And most of them disappeared after that article was voted on. That's how much the town concerned about broadband. Some of them hung around for a while for the full hour, but our town meeting went for 3 hours, nobody hung. By the end of the meeting, I think we're down about 60 people. Okay, one other thing, information flow. Getting the town people mobilized, know what's going on. How do you do this? And so this, you know, no matter how good an idea or how good a thing you're doing, you've got to have people working with you. So I tried as many different ways of information as I could. Not only did we have the town meeting information meeting to discuss the proposal. We had other public meetings too, which were required, such as the public benefit ones. But I also had emails from people. And basically, anything goes on with broadband, people email me. So I'm the contact person. So I have a list of email addresses. We have a town Facebook group, which a lot of town members are on. I find I get a really good coverage there if I post broadband updates on there. And I don't get into dialogues or anything. I just put facts out there and leave and let people yell and scream all they want to about it. But at least the information gets out there. Budget hearings, other hearings, public, but any way you get the information out there. If your town really wants it, if you get the information out there, they're gonna go. And I'll tell you, one of the members of the town actually sprung out of his own pocket and put up a sign saying vote for Article 4 on the town. And I didn't ask him to do it. He just said, hey, I want it bad. I went out and he put up signs up everywhere. So mobilizing and communicating well, making sure you get the right facts out there, and don't let somebody hijack things and start talking untruths. But communication is very important. And that's why, I posted this information on Facebook like I have been. I assume for the special town meeting, we will get a big turnout again. The town's really, really behind us.
Brad, did Consolidated have the broadest coverage in Chesterfield?
Yes, originally, yes, because basically it's landline phones. Now, there were about 10 locations in town they could not provide broadband to. They only had dial-up service to. And there's other locations, 0.8 megabits per second or 1.6 megabits per second.
But from a Chesterfield perspective, Consolidated looked as though they had the most to lose. if the bid went to somebody else?
Well, so, yeah, I guess you could say that, but the real issue is, if you look at Consolidated versus the competitors, they actually had the slowest service of all the competitors. So this is a chance for them to catch up. You know, the Argent and Comcast had much better performance for the people they were serving than Consolidated had. I mean, normally Argent is 50 megabits up, 100 megabits for a lot of people. Comcast is about 125 megabits. And the best that Consolidated could give was maybe 25, 30 megabits at any place. So for them, it was also a chance to catch up with the competitors.
Do you think that if you had gone to a different carrier, the numbers served or unserved would have changed?
Well, the number unserved would include all carriers.
Well, I'm thinking that we were talking a little bit earlier about whether people indeed get 25.3 when that's what it says. And so you're less likely to question that if the deal is going to consolidate, because they want that to be in their favor as well. But if you're going to give it to somebody else, I'm just wondering how. I know a lot of houses that don't get 25.3 that are paying for 25.3. And so if you go to question what they're telling you, then, you know, I'm wondering what kind of a legal battle that might be.
Well, you know, they only know as well as they, I started doing this a couple years ago, and I had many interactions with Fairpoint at that point in time. And they had no idea what coverage was in some places. You know, I said, well, this area right here doesn't seem to be covered on the map. And they would go back, and 2 weeks later, they study and say, okay, this is what we're providing there. They had no idea. It wasn't readily available to them. So their databases are not very good. And I wholeheartedly believe they really don't know, because the way DSL works in the wire paths. Whereas Comcast and Argent, it's a cable product. It's much more direct. It's much more straightforward knowing the coverage. But the DSL, the way the things are wired, it's hard to figure out really what the coverage is. And I know they don't know in a lot of cases. Okay, I had last information on bonding info. This is our latest stumble. So the bonds, because of the fact that the town owns them, but we're giving them an indefensible right of usage, makes these bonds, makes the asset a benefit to a public entity. And because of that, the bonds that are being issued have to be taxable bonds, meaning the person who owns the bond has to pay taxes on the dividends he gets, versus non-taxable bonds. The New Hampshire Bond Bank is limited to taxable bonds of 5% of their entire bond portfolio they issue. So if we're looking at this June bond sale, they can only give us $500,000, which isn't the 1.8 we wanted because of this limit. Already for the January bond sale, they have a lot more people talking about bonding in January. It's up there, and we believe we can get the full $1.8 million in January. So what we want to do is we're going to apply for a bond anticipation note, BAN. That gets us money earlier. It says, okay, they're going to put a quota, offer RFP out there for banks to bid on a short-term note to cover the period of time between now and when we get the bonds issued in January. So it's a short-term interest rate, so it'll actually be lower than the bond interest rate, so Consolidated should like that. And we get the taxable bonds in January, and when we get those taxable bonds, we use that to pay off the principal on the note. If there's not sufficient funds at that point as far as bonds, we'll also do a second sale the following June. So this is a way this is another little caveat here of how you get the funds. The other option is going to a bank, okay? And I went to a couple banks, and they will only bond for 10 years. They won't bond for 20 years. So we're going this route. In fact, this is the newest item that came up last week. We just found out last week. I actually have been trying to get a hold of Consolidated to talk to them. I think they'll be fine with this, but that's now an unknown, and because that also affects the wording in the contract. We haven't signed the contract yet, but this will also affect the wording in the contract. So that's the latest issue we're addressing right now. So I think that's it, unless there's questions.